Thank you, Lawrence. It's my pleasure to join again today. A couple of people of you have already met me during the first Fidelio business workshop that we had, I think, end of June or somewhere. And at that time, I was originally actually planning to have that financing lecture given to you already on that day. But since there was so much of information densely packed, we decided that we have that right now. Since I have been informed that there's also other people joining right now, I thought we'd probably rather start with this small repetition and wrap up of what we had there is too much, but basically, can you guys switch up? Thank you, Malak. Please, everybody who's not speaking, try to switch up your microphones, otherwise we'll have some background noise that might be confusing for everybody. Thank you. Where was I? I thought that it's probably a better idea to have a little introduction again of what we had in the workshop. So for the Fidelio people, I hope this is not completely boring now, but it's already also 3 months ago, so a little repetition might also help to keep it longer in your memories. So that reminder, basically, the first question was, why the hell shall we actually care about this technology transfer? And for the Fidelio people who have seen it, you might remember that part that I always say we have that research cloud of which you are all part of, and where we basically perform our research and are used to all of this gaining knowledge, having grants, having these kinds of consortia like your ITN, etc. But all of that, to do all of that, you need money. Where does that money come from? Originally, I've always used this Mrs. Merkel picture because it worked for the last couple of 16 years giving that lecture. Of course, right now we have that guy there. Where do they get the money from? Because they're apparently not using their own private money to finance your research. Apparently that's tax, and the tax again comes usually from industry. So industry is basically you fueling through politics and their way of spending money, our research activities. Some smart guys directly go to industry and go through third-party funding, working directly on more applied kinds of research. And if you see it here, and if we would leave it here, it's a pretty one-way track, which would not make the whole thing sustainable. To get it sustainable, we actually have to give something back. And that's what we call technology transfer, or more precise, technology transfer and knowledge transfer. That's the repetition to make you aware. And the more we get that circle fueled, the more money apparently also goes back to research. So if you get your PIs ever to ask you, why the hell shall I take care now of patents, for example? Why exactly do you want to spend some time on more validation grant writing than more, basic research funding? Why the hell do you even want to work close and see whether you can bring that technology out to the market and maybe found your own company? That's the answer. The answer is, the more you do that stuff, the more your PI will probably in the end get back in terms of money for his own further research activities. What exactly is this technology transfer? So for the people who have not been joining the webinar, Fidelio research, and of course also all the other types of researches, you usually know that you create some new technologies, some new, be it cell culture models, animal models, whatever that is. And what you do usually is the kind of horizontal research transfer, bringing it to publications or sharing your technologies with other labs. That's the original idea of such an international training network, basically training each other in terms of horizontal tech transfer. What I usually rather speak about is the kind of vertical technology transfer, also called commercialization, where you bring all of those materials that you have produced, or your systems, or your kinds of patents, whatever it is, towards biotech and pharma industry, and basically to the market, to in the end allow, for example, patients to benefit from what you have invented. There's a lot of different kinds of transfer activities, so the university is in the middle. And what you can do is basically bringing your technologies out to the economy, out to civil society through different kinds of measures, which might be a spin-off. That's basically what Lawrence said with all the startup activities that I'm doing. So that's my apparently most favorite way of transferring stuff. They are usually combined with patents and all these IP rights. IP stands for intellectual property, so basically all the patents, trademarks, etc. If I would ask now Fidelio people who are currently joining this webinar, if I'd ask you what is IP standing for and please name it, you should, in theory, be able to do so, but I won't, no worries. There's the research collaborations, of course, that's very familiar to you because that's what you do all the time. And the further it gets to knowledge transfer, the more we also talk about policy consulting and all these stakeholder events. If you followed what Lawrence is oftentimes doing with all his, he's doing workshops, he's doing a lot of newspaper articles and all that stuff. That's basically clearly citizen science, policy consulting, and all that kind of knowledge transfer, which is also part of transfer, but more of that kind of knowledge transfer. What is basically, if you have this official definition, I hope you see my mouse here. So it's all of this capturing, collecting, and sharing knowledge, basically. And that includes also skills and competencies. So also what you are used to in your ITNs, training each other on the different skills and competences that the individual labs have. Basically, other people come, join that lab and learn a lot of things. That's classic knowledge transfer. And if you see here at universities, this typically occurs through the publications, through science communication events, through you guys as being educated students who then not only stay inside of academia, but basically also go out later on to industry. Some of you might do that in future. This is also a kind of knowledge transfer. And of course, the classic exchange at conferences and meetings, that's very familiar to you. What I'm usually rather interested in is not only the knowledge transfer, but basically tech transfer, which also always includes one part is always the technical knowledge that is involved in all of that stuff and the know-how. So basically whatever you produced or developed has always one part is always knowledge, and everything else that belongs to it in combination, that's actually the technology. And as soon as you want to transfer that from one organizational setting to another with the purpose of commercialization, and I also always add from academia to industry, then we talk about tech transfer. Those kinds of things obviously also happen between different kinds of companies. So here at my Dynavine company, where I'm currently at, that's very standard that we exchange all the technologies between different, us as a little startup and big pharma companies that want to work with us. If we transfer here technologies, we rather speak about business development. So that's basically a synonym in the business world for tech transfer. Why is it so important to talk about it? Because times have changed, finally, thankfully. And the times where universities as a hotspot of education and research only are over. So in former times, we would really say, okay, you go to university because people want to perform research or because you want to be educated as a student. But government has figured out pretty quickly that if we only focus on that and only spend our money for these universities on that, a lot of technologies stay inside of the shelves and do never get out. So that's why I'd say in Germany 10 years ago, in countries like UK or Belgium, rather 20 years ago, they said, okay, in particular in the life sciences field, we need to explicitly also look into technology transfer and make that the third column of a university to really foster measures that basically bring technologies out of the universities into civil society through commercialization processes or other stuff. In particular for biotech and the whole life sciences, that was important because it's considered to be one of these key sectors in the 21st century. And where is most of the knowledge produced? Obviously at universities and research institutes. So you need those sources as crucial prerequisites for innovation. If we don't do that, this European paradox happens, which states that we as universities in Europe are damn good in performing research, but unfortunately lack in the skills to transfer these outputs to the economy, which creates a lot of untapped economical potential. And that's why I'm here talking to you, because what you need to get that European paradox solved is trying to set up effective technology transfer processes and knowledge. So you guys need to be aware that What can I do to get that out there? What is necessary? Which processes belong to it? What is a patent in general? And of course, how do I get money for doing the whole thing? Because money is fueling the system. We had it already last time, saying that everybody is aware that tech transfer is a process, like this process of commercialization is super risky, it takes a long time, costs much more than you think, and usually fails, and that's completely right. So you better take all efforts to make it right from the very beginning and try to omit to be one of these failures in the system. How do we do that? That's also just a reminder for the people who were at Fidelio. You've seen that. So reviewing existing literature, getting funding for that, and then doing your research with initial results and some discoveries and inventions. That's, at least for the Fidelio people, something that you are probably aware of and that has already happened or is going to happen in future even more. What then comes is basically this step from, okay, I think I have something like an invention. What do I do now? There you basically go towards finding out how you can protect those ideas. Then you look for subsequent funding, and subsequent means in this regard, it's other funding than the original one, because the original one is really only funding basic research. The next slide will show this technology readiness levels again. Keep that in mind. That is always the most important part here. From this subsequent funding, you basically go to this, okay, non-disclosure agreements to talk, for example, to companies or to other potential customers for the technology. And only if that has happened and you've protected your IP, you can start publishing your results. That's why it's so important to know that you first have to basically somehow protect your ideas, somehow protect your inventions before you are officially allowed to talk about that. I could ask the Fidelio people now why that is. Anybody here who can answer that question? Is there actually Fidelio people? Who are Fidelio people here? The ones who are from Fidelio can switch on their microphones and now tell me, why the hell do I have first to protect my idea before I speak about it? None? Then maybe a repetition of the patent course has to come as well. Because we learned during the patents that one of the prerequisites to get a patent is that it has to be novel. And novel means it should have not been presented somewhere else, be it orally speaking or in writing, or even if you produce already something and make it available to customers, also that is already revealing. And therefore you would infringe with this criteria number one for getting a patent, which is novelty. And that would basically destroy your whole patenting efforts. You wouldn't get a patent for that anymore, simply. If you've spoken about it or written a publication and published that before you've actually protected it. Hence, if you not remember anything from today or the last Fidelio workshop, for researchers, it's essential to remember whenever I want to do something with my idea later on in terms of, for example, patenting it, or for example, creating a whole business out of that. First of all, try to think about it, how you can protect it. And for example, build a patent around that if it's suitable before you publish your publication. That's important. Otherwise, you might disrupt your own future only by speaking too quickly about that. And publishing in that regard does not only mean submitting your manuscript to any kind of Nature or Science or whomever, but basically also revealing too many details in a poster, abstract poster, presenting it at the conference, etc., is already novelty destroying. So be aware of that. With all of that, you basically create your visibility and the final research result, and then you go through valorization and return. It's so funny that that is very shortly drifted here. That can take years. So this is not a very precise timeline here. So that can take up to years. And also there you have other types of funding sources. As said, the funding sources always are derived somehow from where your technology is right now. And there you definitely have to clearly know what technology readiness levels are. This is a term coming from the US military, where they originally wanted to somehow structure and sort their own technologies in-house towards different kinds of, I call it readiness levels. And you have this very basic concept at the very beginning, when you just have a pure idea and no data yet about that. That's TRL0. It goes then to basic research, which is done, as far as understood, inside of this Fidelio research network. and goes up to creating, for example, first prototype systems in TRL4, demonstration systems, which are then already final in a certain way, where you can do that. Commercial systems that really need to then, it's always the same stuff. And for in the end, TRL9 really says, okay, my kind of technology, a product, for example, is now has entered the market and is basically available on the market for consumers. That's TRL9. And it's, if you just think about it, pretty obvious that you need different kinds of fundings for the different kinds of levels, because in TRL9, that is basically the risk to do so. If you have something that's already ready and you could immediately sell it and get basically revenues, money in from customers, why should any public state still fund that? Doesn't make sense. So basically here you can already, if you need money, talk about private money, investors that can come in. Where here in a pure research idea, getting investors, so private money to fund that is rather very, very difficult. Except you have those people like Bill Gates or so, they also do that from time to time, but originally this is, and they do it also through associations, not through their own private funds. So that's why it's so important to, if you ever have this situation and you want to get some money, first what you need to do is, okay, where I'm standing right now, where do I want to go to? What kind of technology readiness level is this? And which are the according funding sources that are available for that in my country, in maybe even my region. So we have these different levels of federal money, then the national money, and then the European money that is available. And there you can have all these different, they always usually state what kinds of TRLs they want to have and they are going to fund. And that's the easiest way to also save time in case your PI ever wants you to write a grant and you know where you're standing with the technology and you know where he or she wants to apply, and you immediately see these TRLs, what we have or where we go to, and what would be funded in that program does not match at all, then don't waste your time in writing a grant. It will be rejected, in fact. How do we do tech transfer? That's another type of, it's called the spin-out funnel from my former colleague Bart Clarus, who was at Imperial College and right now is at the ETH in Zurich as entrepreneurship professor. And he has created that already back in 2005, where he says, okay, the scientific discovery is basically here, the screening and also awareness creation, what's happening right now, is basically also at the very beginning. Here you have this intellectual property assessment. We had that basically, do you work with me? We had that last time, so learning all about IP and how to protect your technologies. And we also had last time this evaluation of the tech transfer potential. So is that what I think is a pretty cool invention? Is a pretty good business idea? Is that actually a good business idea? What do I look into for that? And also this third one we had last time, this kind of strategic choice. Do I rather try and build up my own company out of that technology that I think I have there, or do I rather give it out to, for example, Big Pharma as a license deal and they perform it further and I stay as a researcher at the university? So these are the things. And if you can see that clearly here, apparently everything has this funding process underlined. And as I already mentioned, it's different kinds of funding pots for those different kinds of research, validation, prep of tech transfer, and mode of tech transfer. That statement everybody can enjoy themselves by reading. Coming from Oscar Wilde. And now that I'm old, I know it's true. So that's why it's important that we speak about that money. There's a difference in the, say, inventiveness of, I love the example of bakeries, of, for example, opening another bakery next corner, although bakeries is at the current time a pretty bad example. Maybe we take a hairdresser, that's easier. Also, they take a lot of energy, but let's take a hairdresser. You want to open up your next hairdresser shop, or whether you want to have basically such an innovative business startup that really focuses on a complete new technology like Dynabind or Telemechanics, or one of my two companies that basically want to go out to the market. What's the difference, or the main difference there? If you build up your new hairdresser shop, what you need is basically a shop area, ideally situated somewhere where you have potentially coming customers passing by. You need some sinks, some chairs, And basically that's it. So pretty low investment in the beginning, and then you make some revenues over time pretty quickly. Compared to a really innovative business model, there you rather start and spend a lot of money over a rather longer period of time. But then in the end, if that functions, you also make a lot more money than the original hairdresser shop. So, and that little thing here needs to be somehow financed, because that is time where you don't make any revenues, but you spend money. And to cope with that, you need to get money from somewhere else. And the big question is, where do you get that money from somewhere else? For that little thing here, opening up your own hairdresser shop, you might be able to make that from your own savings. Maybe not right now immediately as a PhD student who is not owning too much money, but basically you could immediately start asking, for example, the 3F money, your family's fools and friends who basically believe in that. While here, when we talk about a couple of million euro, except you come from a very rich family, or you yourself is very rich, then you basically need to have some other funding sources for that. How do you get these finance sources? What is available? There's, of course, some governmental support schemes. So the basic research, that's what you currently are somehow financed of. For validation, you have that. And sometimes also the government gives some money to industry to still make some research or development happening. Self-funding, I explained, except you're very rich, it might be difficult to get that innovative company financed. Your 3F money might be suitable. You have bank loans. You could also go to a bank and ask them if they do it. For a hairdresser shop, banks might take the risk because they pretty quickly could get their money back. While for this, getting a lot of like million euro for a company that is not yet existing, where you also basically don't have any securities, that might be tricky. Partners is a question whether you get that partner who has a lot of money. Customers and suppliers could be the ones if you immediately make returns, like revenues. The question is always if you go for a business model, for example, making the next big drug, which is not unlikely in our field. If you do make a drug, the time before you ever make some money with the drug can be 10, 12, 15 years. So you would have this gap of 15 years that needs to be pre-financed before you ever make something. That's tricky to cover with some customer money. You would have to go alone with that. And then, of course, that's the more classical part that I'm also speaking a bit about today, because that's not so familiar to you guys, is these business angels, or called venture capital, where you have external investors putting some money on the table, and they, of course, want something from that. And my goal today is to at least introduce you a bit to what they want, how they invest into the whole thing, what you have to give to them in return to get that money, and what that whole thing is, that you get an understanding. Okay, if I ever want to make up my own first innovative business where I have that financing gap in the beginning, how can I cover that? 70 to 80% of all new businesses fail. That's just a matter of fact. In the high-tech field especially, you have troubles because there's so many risks that you have to cope with. As soon as you're venture capital backed, that's a bit less, which is mainly due to the fact that, number one, these investors are, of course, smart. They see a lot. Hence, they, of course, also know, is that completely bullshit what they're telling here? Has this been done for 1,000 times and always failed? So they already know when they invest, there must be something. And the stuff that might fail, they already leave out. That's why I oftentimes also say, actually, risk capital investors are rather anti-risk investors. So they try to minimize the risk what they are going to invest into. And number two, of course, they also have a lot of context, so they can help you with their network, and of course also with the knowledge that they have to get your businesses rather straight and a bit more successful towards the market. Why is this failure rate so incredibly high? A couple of reasons. Number one, you might not like that, is the incompetence, because you guys are pretty well trained in whatever you do for research. You're pretty well trained, probably meanwhile also in science communication, in grant writing, in all those things, project management, hopefully as well. But as soon as it comes to taxes, for example, my favorite topic. As soon as it comes to how do I really keep the bookkeeping in the right direction, and what am I allowed to do, what am I not allowed to do, where do I get them in troubles with legal rules, for example, then you guys run into issues if you don't have the right knowledge inside of the team, or if you don't have the right advisors at your side. Tax advisors are available, legal advisors are available, but you have to be able to finance them, and that would then increase the gap of money that you need in advance even further. That's one problem. The other one is, of course, the technology risks. Things can always fail. Just imagine or remember what kinds of technologies you wanted to do, and which kinds of experiments you wanted to do, and how often these kinds failed. The same can happen later on as well, that simply technologies do not work out. The lack of experience is basically the same as I said, there's this little bit of incompetence. And also, of course, market risks. Sometimes the market is not yet ready, or you're too late on the market for things. So timing is a very important issue for getting new technologies to the market. An example for that would be Dynabind, a very good one even, I would say, because Dynabind does basically DNA encoded libraries, DEL in short, where we put millions of different kinds of potential drug molecules into a little tube, and try to find by just binding experiments which ones of those can bind best to potential target protein, and that will then be further developed into a new drug. These kinds of DELs, the original high throughput screening, for the ones who do not know that, they do that bit by bit. So basically one compound binding, next compound binding, and for that it takes ages, tons of energy, tons of materials, etc. And with DELs, we can basically save 90% of efforts, money, costs, and also waste, and get basically 10 times faster to a new drug molecule where then pharma companies can work with. We are not completely the first ones on the market to do that, and that's why I'm mentioning it, but it has basically been invented 30 years ago. The point was 30 years ago, and we didn't have the computational power, let's call it power, computational power, that we have right now. And to really get good results for the whole thing, we basically have to make a lot of AI-based quality control after these binding experiments. And only with this quality control, we can really get good quality data and good hints on what kinds of hits would really work and what not. And that was simply not available 30 years ago. We didn't have that power. It needed that additional computational power to be able to make the DEL now really worth it using. And that's the market risk. That was too early. Technology risk and market risk, why DELs didn't work out 30 years ago, but do right now. Debt financing, I said, is this kind of bank loan. Banks usually want to see before they invest into you a company history, which you don't have if you just start. They take interest rates that are somehow matching with the risks that they take for something that has not been done before. New technology, new team, no managerial experience, no company history. What kinds of interest rates shall they take there? 100%. That's then basically unaffordable for you and very unattractive. And as said, they need securities. And as a poor researcher, if you are not luckily coming from a rich family and already have a house or whatever that you could give as a security, then it's getting tricky to get a bank loan. And even if you have that, the big question would be if your fiancé or husband or wife or whatever might be so happy if you just put that as a security for the bank. This is something that you need to remember, debt versus equity financing. Debt always means this is the bank, basically. You borrow some money for your company, you leave over some security, and you pay that back over time with a certain kind of fee. That's the interest rate on top. And while equity is something else. Equity, you basically receive money for the company in exchange for ownership. So basically you give away parts of the ownership of your company towards the investors. They share then the rights to make some decisions in your company. They share the profits that ever come from that, but you don't have to pay that money back, like in contrast to the debt. That's important, debt versus equity. it's important for the next step to understand that then. A side note on funding versus financing, because that's also something that people always mix up. If you have funding, funding is something that you also have right now at your research. The ITN is something funded, things that you get in 100% money and you don't have to pay that back ever. That would also be weird if the universities and Lawrence has to start paying back for the ITN money that he has ever gotten. So that is really funding. Funding means you get your money and you can work with that 100% and you don't have to pay that back. While an investment is something else. An investment is really money where they either want to have that paid back at a certain time point, like the bank loan, or something like the venture capital that want to have shares in like parts of your company, shares in your company, where you don't have to pay something back as well, but you give something away. That's the difference. And therefore funding is of course always more attractive than the investment, but funding is of course only available for the high risk scenarios. For whenever you come closer to the market, there's no funding options available anymore, but you need to take investors on board to get that done. In Germany, we're in a pretty well situation, in a really pretty good situation. This exists Forschungstransfer and Gründerstipendium programs are one that I know we are pretty envied of all across at least I think even probably across the whole world. It's giving you and 3 other colleagues of you up to 2 years financing, pure funding, so don't pay anything back, pure funding to get your technology developed at the university. So you're still part of the university, you don't have yet your company, but you prepare basically the whole thing. And then after that 2 years, you have a ready to go to market product basically, and then you found your company, and then you can basically start selling the whole thing, or maybe make some more developmental steps, but that always depends. As soon as you go into the company, there's usually investors that then also come on board. But until then, you still have the full control, more or less, about that whole thing. That can be up to €1 million. Here at Dynamind, they had, I think in total, there's financing phase 1 and 2. In total, they had €1.1 million and financed 4 people. Important to know, number 4 of that team needs to be someone with a business background, because the government, who is basically this BMWI, it's the German Ministry of Wirtschaft, Economics, and I think right now it's Economics and Energy, I think it's called. They want to, of course, make sure that you do not only waste that money for, again, another basic research, but they want to really make sure that you further develop your technology towards something that is then ready to go to the market after that 2 years. And therefore, they want to see clearly a business person on board for such a program. And that can help, of course, because that business person usually brings in the knowledge. Remember the beginning of these risks, they bring in the knowledge to make you understand what you need to take care of. And they can also help you with finding the investors afterwards. They can also help you with the whole foundation of the company, etc. So they have the knowledge. There's other types of funding as well, the VIP Plus program. I think I remember that Lawrence tried to get some money out of that. I don't know whether you successfully did that or not. Which is more still for the medical field. You don't have to found your own company afterwards, but it's also more for applied research, where you rather have riper technology readiness level steps. And then we have that SAB is something that is the regional here, where you also have a couple of different stuff, and also on the European level, these proof of concept grants, that's basically how we started at Zellmechanik, are also available. So long story short, check that. If you ever want to go towards technology transfer, there's a couple of different local, regional, national, and international funding pots that can help you doing that. And it's very wise to take that money, because in life sciences field, you usually need quite some money before you can really have a final product or final service established to go to the market. And it's cheap money, because you don't spend any share on that and you don't have to pay anything back. But important to know here, maybe I should make the comment. already when you start asking for that kind of money, the grants look completely different. So that kind of grant that you need to go for a proof of concept grant, for example, on this European level here, they want to know when you apply for it, complete other stuff than, for example, writing this ERC, European Research Council application itself, because there, of course, in the ERC, you still completely focus on the research and what has been known about that hypothesis that you have, what is state of the art there, from where can you develop it, and what's your working programs in terms of research. But for such a proof of concept grant, you really need to analyze the market already. Is there a market need for that? Where is the market need? Who's the customer in the back? Who would potentially put some money on the table to get that done? Which developmental steps have to be done for that? How is that secured? What kinds of official documentation or legal requirements do you have to fulfill to get that on the market? Remember clinical trials or such things, and how are you going to finance that? So it's completely other types of questions that are asked there compared to a basic research grant. And already this drafting this grant might require some more in-depth knowledge on business modeling. That was one of the reasons why we had that first business workshop in Fidelio, because you might have, if you remember what we had there, all these questions that I currently rose were basically answered in that business modeling thing that I showed you over there. So you actually have to think through the future business model of your company and already think through all the questions that arise from there, and that has to be put in the proof of concept grant application. That's why it's so important to know that. That's how it belongs together. That's on the wrong side. That doesn't matter. It should have come to the debt as well. So between I already told you, it's debt and equity. And then you, of course, also have two other types of financing stuff that you need to know about. That's basically internal versus external financing, which is pretty clear, I would say, because the internal stuff comes from the internal company, like profits, like revenues, all that stuff that you basically sell, the money that you do not give to yourself in terms of salaries or give to yourself in terms of profits afterwards, like paying after all the taxes. That is basically used for further development of technologies. That is internal financing. And at Zellmechanik, that's exactly how we work. We never took any external money, but we basically sell our devices, and from whatever we get as money from these devices, of course, we have kinds of some salaries, apparently, because these guys have to live from something, and me too. But besides that, we never put any profits out, but we keep all inside of the company and develop our technologies, our devices further, to finally, in the end, get a device that hopefully will be a MedTech ready device to diagnose sepsis or whatever we come up is the best field of diagnosis for that. And that's internal financing. On contrast, you can, of course, externally also finance everything that's funds from outside of the company, where you can either have this funding as part of it, all the grants, of course, bank loans if you get it, and then also, of course, the equity from external investors. And you always have to ask yourself, how much can you balance that? Of course, also with Zellmechanik, we got external grants, grant money, also to finance our activities, but we're mainly driving ourselves from revenues, which is super healthy because we do not depend on any more external money, but we can really decide ourselves how we finance our steps there. Financing models, that's probably also important to know. Oh, we're already at 45. We probably soon have to end here. We have this low budget model. That's basically where you have a certain amount of money X, and from that you can derive which strategy you want to go to. That's self-feeding, or called bootstrapping. So that's the term that you could remember. Zellmechanik is built like that. So with Zellmechanik, we started back in 2013, got such a proof of concept grant. And besides proof of concept grant, we had a lot of sweat equity and moonlighting. What does that mean? We worked after 6 p.m. for the company. And until 6, I worked for Lawrence. That's what I did, by the way, Lawrence, when I was not in the office anymore. Then in 2016, we in 2015, we founded the company, and from 2016 onwards, we gave ourselves a little extra money in terms of this low, very low budget money, and started really with low salaries to basically keep most of the money that we got from revenues inside of the company to further develop the technology, to get more customers, to get more devices sold, etc. And there you have, of course, this, I won't go through all of that, but R&D projects, of course, play a role. You have, again, that 3F capital that I already mentioned, and then some public support as well. The opposite is this big money model, where basically you come up with an idea how you want to go strategically to the market, which markets first, what kinds of money do you need for patents, etc., etc. And there, basically, you have an amount of X of money, for example, 1 million euro. And then you ask for exactly that 1 million euro external financiers, investors, basically. And that's then the big money model, where the finance follows the strategy, and that can be either seed capital, that's at the very, very beginning. Venture capital is usually then for subsequent financing rounds where you ask for a bit more money. Corporate venture capital is basically venture capital that has been, so how does venture capital in a nutshell? You have a pot, and people that put money into the pot can either be corporates themselves. So Boehringer, for example, big pharma companies have their own big pot of money that they call a venture capital fund. They put in own money, that's corporate venture capital. And then this corporate venture capital is distributed among different kinds of startups that they think might be suitable for the future. Corporate venture capital is very attractive because these companies that have their own pots, basically, Boehringer, for example, they specifically look for technologies that they might later on take up in their own portfolio. So basically, it's pretty likely that your own company gets then sold afterwards to Boehringer Ingelheim. So that step, how do we go on, is already solved. That can be attractive, but that can also be a risk. Attractive because, okay, you had your secure exit route, that's how it's called, how you enter basically then the market. Risky because you usually have to work then also with Boehringer. That's what they negotiate into their contracts. Now, if you have a technology that is super attractive and a lot of other companies like Novartis or Roche might also be interested in, you are not that easy to deal with them anymore. You're not that easy to negotiate with them anymore because Boehringer is already on top of you. That's why it's two sides of a medal. And you have to know when to take up venture capital. That depends on the business model, on your technology, also on the ripeness, and also, of course, on that corporate that is behind the fund. If they are the only ones who might take up your technology, because that's something very exotic, and they are a very attractive one that can definitely help you to bring it out to the market. I've seen that very often for electric, everything that is concerning electric cars. All the people that have done that here in Dresden, we have this Volkswagen big house company here, and they tried to align themselves quickly with Volkswagen because they had, for example, navigation systems. A navigation system itself is not worth it anything if it's not inside of the car. So you try to align yourself pretty quickly on, early on, with that kind of company that might help you to even bring it to the market. And Volkswagen is huge. And besides all their problems in the US with some Abgasskandal, whatever scandals they had, that's usually a very attractive trademark that you can go to, a very attractive company that you can go to. While for us, it's sometimes not that optimal to start immediately with corporate venture capital. That's why there's classic venture capital, who are the ones who put in money into the pot there. That's usually either private people, rich private people, or it's the state sometimes as well. So government also has these kinds of risky options where they put in money. The biggest ones in Germany that we have is the High-Tech Founders Fund. They have still, I think, 30% of their last fund, which is 400 million or so, 400 million are in the pot. 40% of that was given by the government, the German government, and the rest, the 60, is all coming together by different kinds of companies who are willing to put that money in. Why do these companies do that? Number one, because they are smaller companies that cannot afford having an own big fund. And number two, because they also have that interest in getting access to complete new innovative technologies first, because they also are usually then part of the investment board seats, where they then can immediately see what kinds of new technologies, what kinds of new startups come up, and then have a quick first view and also have maybe a first right of getting access to these technologies, which is good. That's how innovation in Germany works. I know that we do not only have German listeners, and I'm super sorry that I cannot give all these details for all the other countries. I'm here, that's where I know the system pretty well. But I know that, for example, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, I think also in France, in Catalonia for sure, in whole Spain, I'm not sure, systems work pretty similar. So you just have to know them, the people who can help you with that. I have tons of more things to say. The point is, we're probably, let me finish with that last slide here, that you get an idea of what kinds of funding do I use when. And then we have a very last maybe moment to get questions if you have some. And if you think that was now too much, or I want to know more, you find my details in the last slide of that slide deck. I will provide it to Teresa, and Teresa can basically then sub-distribute it to the people. And always feel free then, in the end, if you have more questions, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm usually a person that answers on LinkedIn within minutes, so you can find me there. So last slide, you've seen that here. If you only at the concept phase, so at the very beginning, you usually do that with the sweat equity, means you simply work more, and you start doing that after 6 p.m. or so. If you go towards a prototype, for prototyping, you very often already need some materials or a space or devices where you can build that stuff. And for that, you usually already need some money, where you either take your own one, or you ask your granny or your brother or whomever, or you already find a business angel. These are these exceptional rich people that have an interest in getting more technologies done, and who then usually put their own private money into new companies. Very often coming from the same field and trying to get it done, and very often already experienced, successful entrepreneurs who have sold their former companies successfully, and from the money that they got there, they invested into new and next step companies. That's basically business angels. Business angels are one classic financing stream for that kind of seed money, or you go to classic venture capital investors. And then the riper you get, you start with your product introduction. You need some more marketing activities to get to new markets. So you start, for example, in somewhere in Europe, be it France or in Germany. And then you say, okay, I see that there's huge market need also in the US. Okay, then I need a bit more money to get to US, because there I need maybe a sub office that to do stuff from there, or I need people that do the sales over there, or whatever. For that, you also need money. That's basically expansion time. And for this expansion, you usually go then to venture capital investors. And then you hopefully over time finish with some sales and can sustainably live from your own sales activities. And that's then when this gap, that's basically the gap from the beginning, is closed, and where you can fly and make that hockey stick to get rich. Or you're bankrupt. That depends. So that's it from my side. You get the slide set, and I'm happy in the last 5 minutes that we have to get questions if you have some.